So last we spoke, we left off talking about police corruption, and I said that most of the literature recognizes two categories of corruption, one being corruption of a noble cause type, the other being economic corruption. Then I said that there was a third type. This is my type and my type only, but I think it exists, and you'll see when you watch the video later on as part of your task that the video may be more likely of this particular type. But in any case, certainly the beating of Rodney King fits the because they can type. From there, I wanted to talk about some examples of corrupt or unethical behavior. First of all is racial profiling. Racial profiling is assuming that somebody of a particular ethnic or religious background is doing something illegal simply because of their ethnic background or their racial background or even their sexual orientation. This is very similar to, this is the law enforcement version of a hate crime. Now, this can include things like you're in a very nice, white, wealthy area and you see a black man walking down the street giving his dog a walk at night. A police officer who assumes that this black man is committing a crime or doing something similar, something criminal because of his race, and stopping him would be guilty of racial profiling. There has been so much research on racial profiling. There's even a saying called driving while black, which says that black drivers are more likely to be pulled over for routine traffic stops than white people. So racial profiling is making a decision about somebody's potential criminal behavior solely on the basis of their race, color, creed, national origin, and I want to say here sexual orientation as well. That includes being homosexual or being transgendered or being a cross-dresser, which is a man who likes to dress in women's clothing, or vice versa, although generally we don't see that kind of thing. A lot of times what happens in terms of sexual orientation is police will see a homosexual person or two of them in the men's room, and the presumption is that they're there for illicit prostitution or hooking up. So that would be one example of racial profiling or profiling, let's just call it profiling, based on sexual orientation. Another type of corruption or unethical or illegal behavior is illegal force. We'll talk about this in greater detail going forward. There are several reasons for illegal use of force, but basically the rule of thumb for use of force, and this is for use of lethal force and use of non-lethal force. So general rule for use of non-lethal force, and this could include tasers, using your nightstick, or just simply using your fists. General rule for non-lethal use of force is you should only use as much force as is needed to stop or detain a person who is legally, who you have a legal right to stop or detain or arrest. So for example, you want to arrest somebody or stop them, or you want them to come with you, and you say come with me, but nothing else. You don't say that they're under arrest. You don't say what crime they're suspected of being involved in or anything like that, and they say no, I'm not going to. Based on that verbal behavior, you get out your taser and you start tasing them. That would probably be overuse of non-lethal force, because he simply said no. Your better response would be to restrain him physically. First of all, your better response would be try to convince him to come with you. Your second option would be to use some light physical force, like physically restraining him, putting him in what's called a come-along hold or other things of that sort, and then handcuffing him. only if he starts to get violent in return and you don't have enough physical force to restrain him can you use more than that by virtue of that rule of thumb. The rule of thumb for use of lethal force is this: police officers may only use lethal force when their life or the life of someone else is in imminent danger of death or grave bodily harm. And when I say imminent, I don't mean an hour down the road. I mean at that moment. The guy has a gun out and he's pointing it at somebody. That is putting that somebody in imminent danger of death or grave bodily harm. It is imminent. It is immediate. Another is getting an illegal or involuntary confession. Obviously, you can do this without reading the Miranda rights, which is considered to be an illegal confession. Involuntary confessions are things like using enhanced interrogation, as we sometimes do in the cases of national security. My own personal belief about using enhanced interrogation techniques is that they're going to get you a confession or information at some point. But how trustworthy is that information? If you were to torture me, I'd give up my best friend and tell you all sorts of horrible things that they did. But it wouldn't be true because I just want the torture to stop. So not only are enhanced interrogation techniques illegal, but they're likely not to yield accurate results. Examples of involuntary confessions or illegal confessions that are coercive can be less coercive than enhanced interrogation techniques. They can involve things like using sleep deprivation, keeping people without a break. Say you're interrogating them for 8 hours, not allowing them to go to the bathroom during that 8 hours or take a break or get water, not allowing them to have access to their attorney should they so wish. And by that I mean you don't have to give them access to their attorney immediately, but when they ask for their attorney, you must stop that interrogation now and wait to interrogate them again until they're in the presence of their attorney. We'll cover that more when we're in criminal and procedural law. Another example is planting false evidence. Hate to say it, but this does happen more often than you might think. When it is difficult for people to get true evidence on somebody, false evidence will be planted and then found. One example of planting false evidence that is probably the most common is if you do, in retrospect, what you believe is a non-righteous shoot. So you ended up killing somebody and you find out that they were going into their pocket not to bring out a gun, but to rather bring out a sign that says, "I'm blind and deaf and dumb mute, I can't read or see." You might have a little bit of a worry about being called to task for that by your commanding officer, because you probably didn't have the right to shoot, and how many people are really going to carry a gun in their breast pocket. Certainly you would have seen the outline of it. So one of the things that police officers will do is they'll plant their what's often called the throwdown weapon. That it's a non-service revolver that they'll carry on their ankle or some such thing. Sometimes it'll won't even have a serial number on it. They'll use that, they'll put that in the hands of the dead person, they'll curl their fingers around it, and they'll shoot it in the direction of where the police officer would have been standing. The result of this is you're going to have fingerprints on all the right places of the gun from the now dead guy, and you're also going to have gunshot residue on the hands of the now dead guy. And those are two important indicators: the presence of fingerprints. The only place that you won't have the dead guy's prints are on the bullets that you've loaded. And if you're really going to use this, hate to tell you how to get away with this, but if you're really going to use this technique, load your bullets with wearing gloves so you don't get your prints on them, because that's a dead giveaway. So that's one example of planting false evidence. An illegal search is any search that occurs in a place that a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy. Such places would include their person and their home and other things that are very personally attached to them, like their handbag or their backpack. So Americans have a reasonable expectation of privacy in those areas, and typically you need to get a warrant in order to search or seize any of those areas. Without a warrant, any searching of a place where a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy is an illegal search or illegal seize, unless it is one of those situations that falls under the exceptions to the warrant requirement. Too much to talk about today. It's something we will cover in criminal and procedural law. Testifying, I love this name. It's when a police officer gets sworn in court. He says, "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." But in his mind, he knows that telling the truth will not do him any good. So he testifies by lying. This is called testifying. Again, happens more often than you might think. It is illegal. It's not just unethical, but it's illegal. It's perjury. The thing is, are they going to get caught? And in many cases, it ends up being the suspect or the criminal's word against the law enforcement officer. And in general, unless you can prove otherwise, a police officer's word is given more credibility by the jury. Economic corruption, these can include a bunch of things. Taking bribes, for example. This is the case where you stop somebody's car for some kind of a routine traffic violation. You say, "License and registration, please, sir," and clipped to the back of their license is a crisp $50 bill. When you, as the police officer, take that and decide not to give them a ticket, you have taken a bribe. Now, something that police officers often do that's very similar to this, but on the reverse side, on the flip side of that, and frankly something that I used to do as well, I'm kind of ashamed to say, is that they'll keep their badge in their wallet right next to their driver's license. So when the police officer who stops you in your private car says, "License and registration, please, ma'am or sir," you get out your wallet, you open it up, and as you fumble for your driver's license and registration, your badge is clearly seen. So, and then you close it up. Now, it's typically the case that most police officers do not want to give a traffic ticket to one of their brethren, to their brother officer. However, I have seen it backfire. Eddie Diamond, who was my captain, and I mean by that I was his commanding officer, he told me about one example, and he was a captain, so he had a gold badge. He's driving in another state, he pulls out his driver's license, and there is his nice gold badge for all to see, and the cop says, "You're lucky I don't charge you with bribery. Don't think this is going to get you out of any ticket." So can be something that'll work well, can be something that'll blow up on you in both cases. But to my mind, there isn't anything too much different from flashing your badge or giving a bribe, even though I have to admit I did it. Taking a kickback for protection is another, and here's how this happens. Let's say there is some sort of criminal activity at hand, and it's not just like a robbery or burglary. This is an organized criminal enterprise, like a pimp who's running a bunch of prostitutes, or a house of ill repute where there's a madam and girls working under them, or a money laundering enterprise. So these enterprises, to stay out of trouble with the law, will often give officers in their area, so if this is the 5th precinct in the 5th precinct, this is their jurisdiction, the 5th precinct officers will get a certain amount of money each month to divide amongst themselves, called the nut. Don't ask me why, but there you have it. And they'll take this money and they'll divide it amongst themselves. Now, that's the less egregious type of kickback, because the officers didn't ask for it, they didn't threaten for it. The more egregious, and by the way, that's a fancy schmancy word that means bad, more badder, the more egregious type of a kickback is when police officers raid this house of ill repute, or the pimp's stable of hookers, or an illegal gambling den, or what have you, and they are about to make arrests. They ask for the owner, and they say to the owner something like this: you know, we could protect you people for a certain amount of money monthly. So that's basically browbeating them into giving you protection money. And in my mind, that's a little bit more of a serious, it offends my sense of ethics a little bit more seriously than the one where the officer is approached. Another example of economic corruption is when police make an arrest at a crime scene, let's say for possession of some type of drug with the intent to distribute. Now, each state usually has an amount of drug that you have to prove intent to distribute, but this carries a much larger sentence than simple use of a drug. So it's better, if you can, to get somebody on possession with intent to distribute. So you make the arrest, you take the drugs, and you bag and tag that, and you put it into the evidence locker. But sometimes a little bit of that, before you log it, goes missing. Not enough so that it's now no longer enough to charge with intent to distribute, but enough that the police officer or officers can either use it for their own recreational pastime, or more likely sell it themselves. So these are some examples of unethical police or law enforcement behavior. Does it occur in all police departments? No, but many. I gave you the example of, even in my little town before I moved here in Dunstable, Massachusetts, we had a population of 2,000, and our police chief, who certainly wasn't into any of those health or weight control fads, used to refer anybody who would have a car accident to a specific body shop and car repair place. And that body shop and car repair place was not even in the city. Why did he do it? One can only guess, and you had no choice. He just called them, and they came and picked it up. You'd almost have to sit there and take the guy to court, because he did that to me. When I asked him why, he said, well, it's just our policy. I'm like, wow. But in this case, he obviously got some kickbacks from that garage for referring all the business to him. And it wasn't even a particularly good garage, because when I got my car back, I found that they used off-market parts and not the parts from the car company. So I ended up having to take my car back to a better body shop to have the work done a second time. All so this guy could get his kickbacks. We talked about racial profiling. I'm sorry, this kind of came up again. I told you what it is. It's making assumptions about law-based breaking based on racial or ethnic characteristics. Since 9/11, one of the new categories is anybody who has an Arab appearance. Now, it's not only a problem for ethics and illegal. If somebody can prove that a department has a problem with racial profiling, you're going to find that that department develops a reputation much like the police department that handled O.J. Simpson's case. One of the big reasons that O.J. won was because that particular department had a whole, like, racial profiling or racial bias reputation. So it wasn't a big leap of imagination for somebody in the jury to assume, well, yeah, they just targeted O.J. because he's black. So it's not only a problem with ethics, it can also be a problem with enforcement of law and jury credibility. The example that I just gave you was one of jury credibility. An example of enforcement problems I will give to you from the TSA, which is the lovely group of people who do our screening at airports. Shortly after 9/11, the TSA was born, and screening occurred in airports by government employees of the TSA. These were trained people. This was not done on a truly random basis, but rather the TSA officers kind of got to choose who they were going to select for special services. I love that term. I'm going to select you for special services. What that really means is you're going to get an in-depth searching. Well, shortly after 9/11, my husband and I flew to Chicago from Massachusetts to visit my mother-in-law. And our youngest daughter went along with us, and she was a college student. She is adopted, and she looks very Latino or Muslim, if you want to press it, with kind of curly hair and cafe au lait skin. Here we are, she's calling us mom and dad. She clearly doesn't look like us. And guess who gets selected for special services but Shay? Now, we all kind of joked about it later, but the result of that for the TSA enforcement is when they racially profile, they miss a lot of the people who don't fit the profile, but who might be a terrorist. If I were a terrorist and I wanted somebody to carry a bomb on board an airplane, and I knew that the TSA was racially profiling, the last person in the world that I would select to do that was somebody who looked like they were Muslim. In fact, one of the first people I might select is a cute little old gray-haired lady, white gray-haired lady. And even if I hadn't radicalized her, I might try sneaking something in her carry-on luggage. Why? Because when security screening is based on racial profiling, the persons who are going to be screened know that if they don't fit that profile, they don't have much of a chance of being screened, or not screened very well. So, bad for enforcement, bad for prosecution. I'm going to want to go past that. That should have been hidden. I told you that I wanted to talk a little bit about lethal force and non-lethal force. Lethal force uses what's widely known, and this is compelled by the United States Supreme Court. This is their holding. They use the Imminent Danger Standard for use of deadly force. And this restricts use of deadly force, which is going to be certainly a gun. And to some degree, it might be a knife, although police officers aren't equipped with a knife. But anything where you can really kill somebody with, this is the law enforcement standard for use of deadly force. You can only use deadly force in those situations where the lives of the agent, the officer, or others are in imminent danger of death. That isn't here, but of death or grave bodily harm. So somebody pointing a gun at a suspect pointing a gun at a civilian, in that case, that person, the civilian, would be in imminent danger of death or grave bodily harm, and I, as a police officer, would be able to invoke lethal force against that suspect. Conversely, you have somebody who's got a gun and they're flashing it around in front of when a police officer sees and the guy's saying, "I'm going to go find my ex-wife and I'm going to go shoot her dead," is not an example of imminent danger because the wife is not there. And the imminent danger standard would say you can't use deadly force on this person. Why? Because you have, as a police officer, an opportunity to stop the situation from occurring without using deadly force. And again, remember, as police officers, we don't want to kill people unless we have to. So if you can stop a crime from occurring by using less than deadly force or killing somebody, then you're much better off. Use of non-lethal force, hands, fists, taser, etc. This is the most common type of force used in law enforcement, and the standard again is to use only enough force to subdue the situation. I'm not going to have you look at these videos today because I have a video under the task that I'm going to want you to watch. Causes of abuse of force. One is noble cause type corruption. I gave you the example in class the other day where I said you have this police officer who's chasing a pedophile who has hidden a young girl, and his past history of criminal behavior shows that he not only has sexual relationships with them, but when he's done with his toy, he kills them and throws them away. In the past, he has been arrested, but he has not gained conviction because he was what the police officers would say let off on a technicality. And although they cavalierly throw around this phrase, let off on a technicality, what it usually means is very important evidence was not allowed to be admitted into court because it was illegally obtained, and it could have been evidence without a warrant that required one. It could have been beating a confession out of somebody. So, and anyway, past history on this pedophile says that he gets off, and the police officer, now this was actually a movie, it was a Jack Reacher movie, as you might remember. The pedophile Jack Reacher has followed this pedophile, and the only way he's found him is by getting evidence illegally, by searching the guy's house without a warrant. He knows he can find the guy, but he knows that via the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, anything that he gets from this perpetrator will not be admitted into a court of law, even if the perpetrator confesses, because it all stems from this fruit of the poisonous tree, this illegal search of the guy's house. So he gets there, he's in the woods, he finds the guy with his little girl, the little girl that's, is the pedophile's toy, and he says to the guy, "Listen, I have a gun here. I promise you I won't shoot you if you come out with your hands up and leave the little girl alone." Or no, it's like this. "I promise you that I won't shoot and that I'll let you go if you simply push the little girl out of your line of sight so that I can get her." Well, the guy, I don't know if the perpetrator was brain dead or what, but he believes the police officer. He pushes the little girl out from away of the cover of the trees, and then he runs out himself in the opposite direction, whereby Jack Reacher shoots him. He shoots him because he's afraid the guy is going to get out to hurt and injure more children. This is noble cause corruption. He does the evil deed because although he does an evil deed, but his intentions are pure. Sorry, my dog Jason decided he wanted to become part of the lecture. Say hi, Jason. Say hi. A third cause of the perception of abuse of force is what I'm going to call adrenaline and 15-second decision making, if that. Most don't shoot scenarios occur very quickly. You typically don't have a lot of time to think about it. If you did, you wouldn't meet the imminent danger standard because it wouldn't be that immediate. So you make that shoot in good faith. Unfortunately, after you've made the shoot, you find out that it doesn't conform to the use of lethal force. And people, particularly the media, second guess you. Well, it's very easy for them to do. The best example of that I can give you is, and I think I mentioned this in class already, is a case that occurred a couple of years ago in Oregon. And in fact, at the time, I was visiting my friend in Oregon, and she had a party. And everybody was talking about this case where a police officer shot a teenage boy who was not even carrying a real weapon. It was a fake weapon, but it didn't have the orange cap on or any of the orange that it's supposed to in order to identify it as a fake gun. It was very realistic looking. So a cop comes upon this kid carrying what appears to be a real gun, and the kid's just carrying it out and you know, kind of pointing it at things and people. So the cop says, "Son, I want you to put down the gun." Kid doesn't say anything, nor does he put down the gun. The police officer asks him again, "Please put down the gun, or I'm going to have to shoot." And now the kid is kind of playing around and pointing the gun at the cop. The cop finally says, "Please put down the gun," a third time. Kid doesn't, and the cop shot him. This legally would seem to be a righteous shoot, because pointing even a fake gun, one that looks realistic and doesn't have the orange snappy things on it, can easily be misunderstood for a real gun. The police officer asked him to put down the gun. The kid didn't. He asked him 3 times. And so it's based on what I know about the case, I would call it a legal shooting. The people at this party were just ripped about it. The cop shoots somebody who doesn't even have a real gun, and it's a child, and this and that and the other thing. Well, it wasn't a child, it was a teenage boy. Teenage boys who are 15, 16, and 17 can be big and look quite adult, and the gun did look like a real gun. So that's Monday morning quarterbacking of a situation. In this case, the guy didn't even make a split-second decision. But you can imagine how making a split-second decision would be even more prone to Monday morning quarterbacking. This is the end of my lecture. And here is what I'm going to want you to do. This should take you about the rest of the hour. And you don't have to answer the questions. You don't have to give me big answers, because there are a lot of questions here. And I want you to type them up.
Time is 5:30 p.m.
Use your notes and email them to me. That's your 5-point task, and it's also your attendance. So I want you to discuss the law enforcement subculture, and you'll remember that we talked about a subculture being a group of people who have norms and values, and a norm is an unwritten rule. Norms and values that are different from the mainstream culture. And I said that police officers tend to have a very, very strong subculture. And there was a whole slide on what the norms of the subculture of law enforcement is. So that answers your question number 2. What is the blue wall of silence? This is one of the norms of the law enforcement subculture. You simply say what it is. Number 4, discuss the hiring process. We went through that. There were several bullets on a PowerPoint presentation that you should have in your notes, so you can do that. I want you to talk about, forget number 5. Do not do number 5. So don't talk about how these squeaky clean recruits turn into corrupt cops years later. Remember, we said there was a difference between socialized and importation. I really don't want you to do that one. I just want to review and remind you that that's what it is. What is law enforcement corruption? You have a slide on that. The categories of law enforcement corruption are 3: noble cause, economic, and the because you can. Then I want you to read the story at wikipedia.com, and I'll kind of read it with you. This is a case of tasing that occurred at the UCLA library. And in this case, a fourth-year UCLA student was stunned with a taser multiple times by campus police for allegedly refusing to show his school ID to a fellow student acting as a security person at the college library during finals week. Now, police at UCLA, you had to use your campus ID to even get in after hours. This was after hours, so the natural result of this line of thinking is that anybody who is in UCLA library after hours got in with his UCLA card. This student was asked to show his card by the security guard. It wasn't common practice to do so. In fact, it was unusual. The student felt that he was being treated, that he was being singled out for treatment because of his ethnic background. He said he wouldn't. The police attempted to remove him physically from the library, and they tased him multiple times. When they did this, they would tase him once and wait until he would come through, two, and then they'd say, get up and walk on your own. If he didn't, they'd tase him again, instead of doing what most normal police officers would do. If you had to tase somebody, for God's sake, when they're quivering on the ground, cuff them and get them up. Or to avoid having to tase them, since there were multiple people there, one officer or guard on each side, hold him, and the third one cuff him. So here is the oops. Here is the YouTube video. Sorry about that. And you can see that at, let's see if I can bring this up. This is a student with his phone viewing the situation, or videotaping it. You can see it's a library.
Stop fighting us! I'm not fighting you! I said I would leave! I said I would leave! Yeah, I want your badge numbers. Yeah, can you bring me your badge number? I like your badge number. I got tased for no reason. I was leaving this godforsaken place. You stopped me. You're abusing your power. Here's your justice at work, University. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Fuck off. You just shot him up. You just stand up. Stand up, or you'll get tased again. Stand up. Get up. Get up. Stand up. No, get up. Stand up. Get up, or you'll get tased again. No. Get up. Stand up. Get up. No, no. Sit up. Up. Stand up. That's up. All right, come stand up. Get up. Get up. You motherfucker. Get up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. You can say, I'm dragging this down. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Officers, we want your information.
Then stand up.
No.
Stand up. Stand up.
This is about abuse of your authority. Please don't use this.
Stand up.
I said please.
Stand up.
If you
Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up.
Yeah, that guy and then came, that guy and those had left the
This goes on for 6 years.
Stop it.
So your question for this is read the story and don't discuss the use of force in general. So change this question to be, did these officers correctly employ their use of non-lethal force based on the guideline that we talked about earlier? So you're going to do questions 1, 2, 3, 4. Forget 5. I would cross this right out here. So you're going to do 6, you're going to do 7, and then 8 will be to answer the question, did the officers in this video correctly and legally employ their use of non-lethal force? And explain your answer. I'd also ask you to think about what type of corruption this might be. Is it noble cause corruption, do you think? You don't have to write this down as your answers, but it's something we'll talk about in class on Thursday. Do you think it was noble cause corruption, economic corruption, or the Dr. Peterson's just because they can type of corruption? So with that in mind, I will see you on Thursday. 5-point task. So an opportunity to get 5 wonderful points. And it will be your attendance for that day when I get it via email. I will log you in as attending or not attending. Email your answers, because they'll be typed, to Cheryl, CHERYL, .Peterson, PETERSEN, at uaccb.edu. And let me just write that down for you so that you can see it written. Here it is. Oops. No, I want to make this bigger. So those are your assignments, and I'm going to see if I can't get that a little bit bigger. Here it is. So hopefully you can see this. Email that to me Tuesday, and I'll see you in person in the flesh on Thursday of next week. Talk to you later. We'll discuss this further on Thursday as well.